Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Maartje.
And we like World War II media and we want to talk about it.
Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we are discussing the movie Black Book, or Zwart Boek. It's a Dutch movie. It came out in 2006. It was directed by Paul Verhoeven, written by Gerard Soeterman and Paul Verhoeven himself. It's a movie about a young Jewish woman who becomes a spy for the resistance in the Netherlands during World War II. And that's a very general summary of the movie. A lot of things happen in this movie, and it's very, very Dutch. What did you think of this movie?
One might almost say things never stop happening in this movie. It's pretty action-packed. This poor woman is going from place to place, and just when she thinks she's safe, there's more Nazis or this or that is happening. It reminds me a little bit of a spaghetti western. Low budget, super violent, graphic in places. Everyone's kind of morally gray. There's not really a happy ending. I don't know if it's like my favorite war movie that I've ever seen, but I watched it and I was entertained. I'll say that.
It's funny you should say you think it's low budget, because at the time it was the most expensive Dutch movie ever made. It had like a $17 million budget, which was high at the time apparently. But
if you think about war movies, like an American war movie would cost like $100 million, right?
Yes. And I don't think there's any special effects in this movie, so that's also why you don't need $100 million budget to do expensive shit. But I do know what you mean, and this movie's 20 years old almost, and you can tell the movie making in this is questionable maybe, but Paul Verhoeven is known for his action movies, and I think he's done RoboCop and some other like sci-fi stuff. I've not seen very much by him, but he's a Dutch guy who moved to Hollywood and then didn't do a Dutch movie for 20 years, I think, and then came back to make this one. So something must have moved him to make this. And it's full of famous Dutch people, and some of which you can see in Hollywood today. So Carice van Houten, who plays the main character in this, you'll see her in Game of Thrones. And Michael Huisman is also in this, who's also in Game of Thrones, and in some other shows. So, interesting. I do like this movie. I've seen it a couple times. I saw it in the cinema when it came out, and I've seen it maybe once or twice since, and then yesterday for this podcast. So I don't know, we don't have that many good World War II movies, and therefore I cherish them when they come out, I guess.
Yeah, we should say that this movie is not strictly based on a true story, but it's kind of loosely based on a couple of different true stories, but kind of sexed up and made a little more flashy and exciting.
I mean, it is Dutch, so that explains a lot in that regard. Anyway, let's get into the plot.
We open in Israel in October of 1956, and this was actually shot in Israel on the director's dime, I believe, because the producers didn't think the Israel scenes were strictly necessary, and he insisted. There's a bus full of tourists visiting a kibbutz, which is sort of like a Jewish commune. One of the tourists recognizes a teacher there. She recognizes the teacher as Ellis, but we learn that the teacher's real name is Rachel, and the woman, the tourist, Ronnie, played by Helena Rain, they know each other from before the war or from during the war, and they promise to write to each other.
So, just for us Dutchies out here, the name Rachel in Yiddish or Dutch would be Rachel, and I'm not going to make Sam say that for the entirety of the movie, but it's apparently, I didn't know this, but it means Mother of Israel, which I thought was interesting, if nothing else.
We are going to see Ronnie later when the movie flashes back to the wartime.
We see a lot of Ronnie.
We see perhaps too much of Ronnie.
So Helena Rijn actually has moved to Hollywood and recently directed Baby Girl, which I think it's making the round on like the award cycle right now. So it's pretty amazing.
Nice. Good for her.
So after this little introductory scene in Israel, we flash back to the Netherlands in September of 1944. A Jewish singer called Rachel Stein, played by Carice van Houten, is hidden away on a Dutch farm. an English bomber, I think it's an English bomber, drops his load to try and get away from, I think, a fighter plane, accidentally destroying the farmhouse that she's been staying in and hiding in. And a sailor, a very cute man named Rob, helps her out and helps her escape. He's played by Michael Huisman. And they kind of stay at his place for a bit. And then a resistance man comes to them at night. He's called Van Gein and he's played by Peter Block. And he warns them that they have to hide before the SD, which is the Sicherheitsdienst.
They're the intelligence branch of the SS, so they're operating a bit more behind the scenes.
They are looking for her because his boat has been spotted and her identity papers have been found. So this man, Van Gein, tells them they have to go into hiding across the river.
Okay, so the woman in this scene is the woman we saw in the first scene. This is like 10 years earlier, though. And during the whole scene, I was like, wait, does she know this sailor guy? What is happening? I think she knows the sailor guy from before. That was the vibe that I got by the end of the scene because they were so familiar with each other. And then I was like, well, I don't know. It's not clear to me. But I was struggling a little bit to catch up on what I was supposed to be catching up on in the first scene or so. So Rachel knows that she's going to have to get the fuck out of Dodge because the Nazis have scoped out this farmhouse that she was staying in. They found her past. They're looking for her. And being Jewish, they want to pick her up and take her away somewhere nefarious. And so she goes into town and she visits the family notary, who's called Small. He's played by Dolph DeVries. And she's trying to borrow enough money and jewels from him for trading when she goes on her trip. And he obviously knows her family. He's like, yeah, you know, your dad's going to be responsible for paying me back or whatever. So clearly a family friend. And he gives her a whole stack of cash and a whole bunch of diamonds, which, I mean, we'll find out later, but probably pretty sure that he was going to get those back.
Yeah, this notary, the actor who plays him, he's got a very trustworthy face. You're like, oh, this guy's nice. And there's something about this movie, they do something quite clever. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but there's a lot of details in this movie that come up again later. She has her little amulet with the pictures of her parents in it that she needs to give to the notary to prove that she's who she says she is. But we see the locket again and again in the movie. So they do, even though it's a very Dutch kind of crude action-packed movie, there's little things in it that I quite enjoy, and that's one of them. But thankfully, Rachel gets what she needs from this notary man because she has to escape occupied territory to try and get to liberated territory in Belgium. But to do that, she has to cross the Biesbos. It's like a national park thing in the Netherlands. And she does it on a boat. But also she meets her parents and her brother there because suddenly they are also there. And she's very happy to see them. But as she gets on the boat and they're being ferried over by the boatman, it's in the middle of the night. All of a sudden, there's this big white light from the Nazis as they turn on their floodlights on their boat and they kill everybody except her because she manages to get away. But it's obviously a setup. And then she watches as the Germans, specifically one German, and we'll get to him later, take all the riches, all of the people's jewelry and money and all that sort of stuff, and they're not very respectful to the bodies either. Everybody's brutally murdered, and she gets away. And you have actually made a note about the Biesbos. So it's a national park containing a nearly impossible network of waterways, as there are many in the Netherlands. It's nearly impossible to navigate unless you know your way around, and that's still the way today. Located between the occupied and liberated Netherlands in late 1944 or early 1945, military, intelligence, Jews, and downed Allied airmen were transported via canoes or other small crafts by the resistance network, which is what we see, except it doesn't really go that well.
Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, did the Nazis also shoot the captain of the boat? I'm like, you have to find a new fresh captain every time? Like, surely it's easier to get your own captain and just have it always be the same guy.
I don't know if we know for sure. I know she asks about it at some point later on, but I don't think we see him die, but we also don't see him live. So I don't know.
I just feel like that's wild. You're like, we're going to rely on this guy who's not in on the game and we're going to kill him. And then next time we're going to have to find another guy to drive the ship. Just like get your own guy and don't kill him.
Yeah, I was just sad at this point to have Michiel Huisman already die in this movie because he's so cute. And now he's dead.
He really did die immediately. When they introduced him in the first scene, I was like, oh, this is a meet cute. He's going to be the love interest. And then it's like, no, shot. Yeah. So Rachel, she gets smuggled in a hearse. She's pretending to be a dead typhus victim in a coffin. And the Germans don't want to get too close and look at her. So she gets smuggled back into the city and
she meets Fairman Kuipers, played by Derek de Lind.
He's the head of the resistance in The Hague, and she starts working in their soup kitchen under a new identity. So she's going to go by Ellis de Vries, and that will help her conceal her Jewish heritage.
Stuff like this, being dead in a hearse, that sort of stuff happened. It's so wild to me that you just do that. And the only thing I'm really confused about, and it's not addressed in the movie, which is probably why, is that how does she know all these people? How does she find the people who can help her?
I know. In the first scene, she's staying with a family. Unclear how she met those people. And clearly she's been in hiding for some time because it's 1944 and they were definitely well underway with deporting Jews by then. And then she randomly meets the guy in the sailboat. And then he dies, and then she gets smuggled into the city to join the resistance. I'm like, how do you know these people?
I've never even thought of this, but we forgot to mention a little detail, which is my fault because I didn't put it in the notes. But she is a famous singer, so maybe she just knows a lot of people. I mean, it would make sense.
Yeah, I suppose we can't rule it out.
Right. She works in the soup kitchen for a while, and about 5 months later, one of the resistance regular couriers, who's a woman, falls ill. So they ask Alice if she wants to be put on a more dangerous task, and she agrees. And she meets Hans Ackermans, played by Tom Hoffman. He and his men are part of a KP, which is a stands for Knokploeg. I'm not going to repeat that for any of you. But it's basically the resistance hard men doing most of the dirty work. They also did non-dirty work, but the KPs literally were, you'd call them a gang if you were to translate the word literally. But she and Hans will have to play an engaged couple who will distract the Germans on their mission, and their mission is, I think, to place a bug in the SD's headquarters. But they have to be on a train first. But there's a lot of stuff that happens, and it all goes wrong, because first there's a dropping of, equipment and stuff. And that the Germans also find that. And I remember when I saw this movie 20 years ago, I kept thinking, how likely is it that every single time they do anything, it goes wrong? But then I read a book recently, this week, called SOE in the Netherlands, an official history, and it's called an official history because it's basically all the mission reports from the SOE. And they were so riddled with traitors and betrayers that the Germans just knew about all the shit the resistance was doing all the time. So it's not as strange as it sounds.
Yeah, there's definitely a good chunk of this movie where every time they try and do anything, the Nazis bust in.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, what do you know? It's the Nazis again.
And in the book, they call the German interceptors the German Welcoming Committee.
Did you say what the SOE is?
No, I did not. You can say it.
It's the Special Operations Executive. It's the British spy agency that was working with resistance networks on the ground to try and provide them with help.
Churchill was a big fan of the SOE, apparently.
Yes, and friend of the pod, Violette Szabo was in the SOE.
Yes, and so are many of the other people that we see in lots of spy movies. This book is interesting if anyone wants to read it. It's called SOE in the Netherlands, The Official History. It sounds really unofficial, but apparently it's official.
But yeah, long story short, all of these spy and resistance networks were super leaky. They were really easy to infiltrate. And that's why the Nazis keep busting in every 10 seconds. So the next day, basically what's happened is there's been a night drop by the British. They've dropped them all this equipment and they're trying to move it by train. But unfortunately, what happens when they're on the train is that the Nazis come in and they start searching everyone's suitcases. And so Ellis/Rachel, thinking quickly, she grabs her suitcase, she goes into another car, and she sees a German officer named Ludwig Munz, played by Sebastian Koch. And she decides she's a very pretty girl. She's very friendly and charismatic. So she decides she's going to kind of cozy up with him and he has a stamp collection. She's looking at his stamp collection. She's like, oh my God, your stamp collection. So cool that you collect stamps. And he's missing a bunch of Dutch ones, which will come up later. And because she's kind of all cozy with him and he's very charmed by her, when she gets off the train, her suitcases don't get searched.
Exactly. And also, she also doesn't get asked for papers because she doesn't have any that are, I think, they are not in her. I don't know, it's confusing. But basically, Munster is annoyed that they're interacted. So it's like, go away, I'm busy.
Yeah, she really truly just blags her way through. Like, she really is just acting her ass off.
You see, if this had been a man, it would have just all failed. I just want to say, go women.
Yeah, she's definitely using her pretty girl presence to her advantage. Yes.
We're being kind of funny about it. This movie is pretty liberal with the feminine assets, I should say. But it's, in all fairness, most of the resistance ladies were careers and were very apt at this job because they were just less suspicious and they were very good at this. So I'm being funny about it, but in truth, that did happen quite a lot. So thank God.
If I recall correctly, we'll talk a bit more later about one of the real people that Rachel is based on. But if I recall correctly, there was a situation where this sort of happened. She just talked her way out of it, just was like, oh my God, I'm just a girl. And like genuinely people underestimated women so much that she got away with a ton of stuff.
There's a thing about this movie, there's so many characters in this movie, so I feel for Sam because they're all Dutch names. Because in the next bit, we meet Gerben's son, Tim. We met him before, but he gets bit. Something happens to him. He gets arrested by the Germans when they are accidentally caught smuggling guns. And Gerben, if you've not caught on, Gerben is like the head of the resistance in The Hague, so even his son is a pretty big deal. He gets arrested, and obviously the whole chapter of the resistance here is desperate to free him, especially his dad. So they come up with a plan. They're going to infiltrate the SD's headquarters, where his son is likely being kept. And they're going to use Alice to do it, because they've seen that Munzer has taken a bit of a shine to her, which is true. It's not a lie. They're not making it up. But yeah, she needs to do some stuff to get in there first.
I'm so thrilled that I get to talk about this part, because before I watched the movie, Mart was like, there's a pube dying scene. And I was like, okay. And then I forgot about it. And then I was watching the movie and I had to run and message you and be like, I'm at the pube dying scene. So Ellis/Rachel, she's dyed her hair blonde so she can pass as Dutch and not Jewish, but she realizes that if she's going to sleep with Munzer, she has to look the part. The curtains have to match the drapes. So literally bleaching her pubes. I'm not kidding. She's just sitting there in front of the mirror bleaching them. And then she's complaining that they're burning, because of course they would, putting bleach close to your hoo-ha. And Hans comes in, resistance guy Hans. We find out he's a doctor and they smash. And I'm very concerned that she did not rinse that bleach out before they smashed.
Well, yeah, I'm concerned for her, not so much for him. I'll explain why later.
I hope it burns for him, for sure.
I hope it burns. So once she's done that, once she's kind of altered her appearance to the point where she thinks she will pass, she goes to the SD headquarters using the stamps that Munzer is missing of Queen Wilhelmina. She uses those stamps, which she got, by the way, from the notary. Like, she's gone back to the notary and was like, do you have any stamps? And he, gives them to her. And she kind of flags her way into the building, saying she's trying to see Munzer. And he also wants to see her, because obviously he likes her a bit. But this is where she meets Ronnie, played by Hanina Ren. We met her in the little flash forward, I want to say, in the very beginning. He's a very exuberant redhead, this Ronnie. And Ronnie is, to put it lightly, extremely friendly with her German occupiers.
Yeah, she works for the Germans. She also has one of the German SS guys or SD guys as her boyfriend. And she says at one point that she agrees with them, but we were talking about this a bit offline about how way more Dutch people than you think were, if not super on board with the Nazis, then at least kind of ambivalent about it.
In the SOE book, it says that over 600,000 people were a member of the NSB. That's the Dutch National Socialist Party. So that's a lot of people.
Yeah. And of course, the instinct after the war to be like, well, nobody wanted them here and everyone was in the resistance. Like, that's understandable. But I think we know better now for the most part.
Yep.
So Ella/Rachel joins Munsa at an SD function. And if you'll recall, she was a singer before the war. So she gets up and sings for everybody. And she unfortunately meets this really shitty dude named Gunther Franken, played by Valdemar Kobus. And he's an SS officer, but he's also the guy who orchestrated the boat shooting where her family and her sailor friend got shot, and she was the only survivor. So she sings at the party, but then she kind of like freaks out and runs out of the party. Her and Munsa get cozy in his room. There's this scene where he sees the roots of her hair, and he's like, "Your hair is naturally black." Immediately jumps to, "You must be Jewish." And then she takes his hands and puts them on her boobs, and she's like, "Are these Jewish?" And then he gets to see her dyed pubes. He gets to admire the artwork, and he's like, "Wow, you're really committed to the bit." And they smash.
And that's at that point, Winston knows who she is, right? He's figured her out, but he's kind of not saying anything. So she starts working at the headquarters, which is helpful because that way she can see and hear how her fellow resistance buddies get tortured to fuck. And she also notices how when she's typing up a report of one of the sessions with the resistance guys, she sees that one of them has talked. And for all this, again, this movie is very crude. But there's bits in there that are actually quite good. Like the acting is quite decent in this.
Yeah, for sure. I think the main actor is particularly good.
She does all her own singing as well. So her singing is actually her singing.
Yeah. I also think Munsa finding out that she's Jewish and not doing anything about it is one of countless examples in this movie of the director's really fond of this moral relativism and also this kind of like nuanced, some people do good things, bad people do good things, and good people do bad things, but really everyone is kind of shades of gray at different times.
Yep. Yeah. And you don't quite know how true that is at this point of the movie yet, but you'll find out later for sure.
Right. Well, Ella/Rachel manages to plant the bug in Munsa's office, and through it, the resistance learns that Van Geen and an unknown other person are providing the Germans with lists of names of wealthy Jews trying to cross into Belgium. If you remember, Van Geen is the police officer who comes to tell her at the beginning, like, "Look, you're in danger. You got to go. You got to get out of here. You got to get on the boat and cross the river." And so obviously what's happening is that he's providing the Germans with lists of names of wealthy Jews. He's getting them onto this boat, and it's basically he's setting them up to be massacred. And of course, they shoot them and rob them. So it's about money at the end of the day. And obviously, that's what happened to her. So she's got a lot of skin in the game.
And they also get to kill some Jews in the process. I mean,
yeah, it's really gross. Like when Van Geen is getting the people ready to go on the boat, he's like, "Yeah, bring all your money, bring all your jewels, bring all your stuff because you're going to need it to start your new life." And then obviously he's just planning for them to be killed and to get his cut of whatever gets stolen.
And up until this point, we still thought that Van Geen was a good guy. And this is the point where you as an audience realize that, wait a second, wasn't he the Dutch guy that helped her in the beginning? And yes, he is.
All he did was put her in the crossfire.
Yep. The resistance fellows, especially the KP guys, the violent guys, are not very happy about the betrayal by Van Geen. But Kuipers, the head of the resistance, the Hague resistance, he doesn't want them to kill Van Geen because if they do, they are afraid that the Germans will retaliate, kill a bunch of resistance people. That happened, so it's not a strange thought. So instead, the KP decides to only abduct him, but the plan to abduct him goes terribly wrong because it turns out the chloroform that they tried to use has gone bad.
Gotta hate when your chloroform goes bad right before you're about to do a kidnapping.
So a bunch of people get shot, and also Van Geen ultimately gets killed by the most religious person of the group, who only kills him because he curses. At first he doesn't want to kill him, and then he says like, "God damn it," and then he shoots him.
I know, and especially it's like That guy knows that Van Gyn has caused hundreds of people to be killed, but he's like, I can allow some light murder, but I draw the line at blasphemy. It's just more of this, moral relativism shit, right?
Yeah, and also this actor is the son of a very famous TV presenter in the Netherlands. And he's a well-known guy, but he doesn't normally act, which I think you can tell he's not very good. But because they kill Van Gyn, the captured resistance members are now in imminent danger of being executed as a result of this. So the shit has hit the fan.
Yeah, exactly the thing that they did not want to happen has happened, because now Munsa and all the Nazis are mad as hell, and they're going to take it out on everybody and anyone.
Yep.
The gang, the KP, they want to turn themselves in. Everyone's being very noble about it. They're like, I'll turn myself into the Nazis so no one else has to die. I'll also turn myself into the Nazis. It's like, great. Everyone turn themselves in and then there won't be a resistance left. Great thinking, guys. But instead, they devised a plan to try and free Tim and the other guys that have been in prison for the last little while. Munsa suspects Ellis/Rachel. He pulls a gun on her. Her tits are out a lot in this movie. So in this scene, once again, her tits are out and he pulls a gun on her and she comes clean with him. So the next day we see Munsa. He gets the head Nazi in charge and they're going into Franken's office. Franken's the evil SS dude who shot Ellis/Rachel's family. And they go into his office and they search his safe because they're sure that all the money that was stolen from the wealthy Jews that he killed must be in there. And they're like, look, it's not a problem for us that you killed all those Jews, but you took their stuff and you didn't give the Reich a cut. And that's what the crime is. But he obviously kind of knew that it was coming. He manages to turn it around on Munsa. He's like, hey, by the way, did you know that Munsa is negotiating with the resistance? Yeah, he's basically telling them that we'll stop retaliating against them if they turn in their guns and they do this and that and whatever, which is true. And so Munsa gets in trouble and he gets arrested.
Yeah, and they also say he suffers from defeatism, which we've seen before in other movies is very illegal.
Yeah, like at this point, right, it's late 44, early 45, the writing's on the wall, and Munsa's like, guys, what are we doing? At this point, we should just try and minimize Germans getting killed. And they were like, no, how dare you?
And also, I kind of forgot about the scene with the gun, when he pulls the gun on her when they're in bed together.
He literally waits until she's naked. But I was like, good guy Munsa, because he definitely could have smashed her and then pulled the gun. But he pulled the gun first.
And also, he pretends it's an erection and it's not. It's just his gun.
Oh my God, I forgot about that. Yeah, she like sees him on the bed and she's naked. And under the sheets, you see like his boner come up, like, and then all of a sudden he like pulls it out and it's not a boner, it's a gun.
It's actually a callback to earlier in the movie because when they're on the train with Hans, he says, when they're standing close together, he says to her, oh, that's just my gun.
Oh, yeah. What did you think it was? Is that a gun in your pocket or are you just happy to see me? Classic.
So Muntz is arrested and the resistance still wants to get all the other prisoners out of the building. But Alice pressures them into also getting Muntz out. She says, if you're not going to take him out, then I'm no longer playing this game. So they need her because they need her to distract the Germans as they try and bust the other ones out. Because it's the Fuhrer's birthday celebrations that night, and she has to sing for all the Germans. I don't know, she's pretty clever. She's like, you're not going to do this without me, so you better take my lover out of there. And at this point, I don't think they know that they're kind of lovers. I don't think they know, but they're like, why do you want this guy out? And she just doesn't answer.
Well, they know that she's been sucking him because at the beginning, like when she first got into town, they were like, how far are you willing to go? And she's like, I'm willing to go however far he's willing to go. So they definitely know that she's sleeping with him, but they don't know that she has actual feelings for him, which she appears to have.
The director has made Munza, I think it's the director anyway, they've made him sort of likable because his wife and his kids have been killed in the bombing of Berlin. So they've given him something to make him seem more sympathetic. Which is, again, the morally gray stuff is coming up again. using all sorts of stuff to make him not as evil as he could be.
Right, because he is very definitely a Nazi, and it's pretty late in the war, so it's doubtful that he managed to get through without getting any blood on his hands.
When we meet him in the beginning, he tells Alice that he collects stamps from every single country he's been stationed in, and he's like a high-ranking officer. And he goes like Poland, France, Belgium. And he's done all sorts of awful shit whilst he's been there. So they do it both ways. They make him evil, and then they do something that makes him seem less evil. And it's like that all the time.
Yeah, and it's kind of the flip with the resistance guys. It's like a lot of them do not necessarily great shit on that side, even though they're supposed to be quote unquote good guys.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they go in to rescue Tim and the other guys. That should be the name of their band, Tim and the Other Guys. They go and rescue Tim and the other guys from prison, and they get there, and it's an ambush. The Germans bust out of the cells, guns blazing. They kill a bunch of the resistance members. One of the guys using another guy as a human shield. Everyone's getting shot. It's the whole thing. The resistance suspects Ella/Rachel of the treachery because basically what happens is Franken arrests her, brings her into his office, and then while the bug is still on, he's like, "Thanks so much for helping me. Thanks so much for making it possible that we could kill these resistance members. You've been such a great help." And she can't respond because one of the Nazis has a hand over her mouth. So the resistance hears all this and they think that it's true, that she was helping the Nazis, even though she wasn't. And then he destroys the bug and locks her up.
I like all these different elements of it, and then it does something that I like less. If it had been made today, it would have been a really good movie. That's the kind of movie it is.
Man, after this point in the movie where the resistance thinks that Alice/Rachel was working with the Nazis the whole time, the whole rest of the movie, I was like, how is she going to clear her name? I was obsessed with it. I was like, what can she use as proof that she didn't do that? And I was just thinking so much about it. I was like, man, after the war, she's going to probably get arrested for this, or the resistance is going to hunt her down or whatever.
That's what happened to her real-life counterpart that she was based on. This lady got accused of being a traitor, and the resistance aren't the sweetest people. They're pretty rough on their own, especially if they betray them. So, yeah, it's not looking too great for Alice as she gets locked up. But then, out of nowhere, Ronnie decides he doesn't like her being locked up. And there's one German left that's still loyal to Munster. And Ronnie kind of distracts all the Germans with her boobs. The loyal German to Munster sets them free, so they get away.
Yeah, Ronnie, another very morally gray character, right? Super loyal to the Nazis, but ultimately she comes through.
She marries a Canadian.
She does marry a Canadian. Yeah, that's her husband when she's touristing in Israel, is this Canadian guy that she met during the war.
Yeah.
Well, Germany surrenders. It's May 1945, but Ellis and Munster are on the run. They have yet to prove their innocence. It's not good for them because they had to be on the run from the Nazis, and now that capitulation has happened, they have to be on the run from everybody else. Hans, our resistance guy, he manages to get to Franken before he can get away.
I don't know if you noticed what Franken says just before he gets shot.
I don't remember.
You see? He says, "What are you doing here? Twit."
So he knows him. Dun, dun, dun.
It's a bit obvious. I kind of wish they hadn't done that, to be honest.
Yeah, but I guess you need to set up enough little hints and flags throughout the movie that if someone's paying attention, they can try and guess it and the ending doesn't come out of nowhere.
So Franken, he was on a boat with all his jewelry, and he gets nothing because he dies. Thankfully, he's awful.
I actually had totally forgotten until you said it that he tries to escape on this slick-looking boat, and then as they're escaping, his sidekick goes and takes down the Nazi flag on the front of the boat. But I'm like, you're still fully dressed in an SS uniform? What do you think is going to happen? Like, you still are dressed fully like a Nazi.
Meanwhile, or after, I suppose, Ellis and Munster are trying to prove the fact that they are in fact innocent. Though how innocent Munster is, I can't really say. But at least they're trying to say, look, we didn't betray you all. And so they go to see the notary.
This specific bad thing.
No, he didn't do this one.
We didn't kill these Jews.
No. I've just decided just before the war ends that I'm going to be the good guy now, is what Mincy is saying. I have to say, the chemistry between him and Curtis van Houten is there. It makes for an interesting relationship, and the actual actors were together for several years after this movie, so they felt the chemistry all right. But yeah. And during the celebrations, they go to see Notary Smiles because they have figured out that he was in on Franken's Jew murdering money grabbing scheme and that he profited from it. Smiles is interesting because he says that every suspect deserves a fair trial. And he says that about himself and his wife, but also about Alice. So he's definitely very, very morally gray in that moment, but then he has stolen all of this money from all of the Jews. So I don't know how gray you want to call it.
Yeah, if we recall from the beginning, he's the one who gave Alice/Rachel the big fistful of diamonds and wad of cash. And then looking back on it, you're like, oh, okay, so he just did that because he knew that he was going to get that back when she was dead.
And he's also the one who brings in the bug into the headquarters. So he does that as well. Like, he's instrumental on both sides. Like, he plays the resistance. Like, he plays him for a fool, but he helps them knowing it'll set up his own, like, escape. So it's pretty gross. But they want him to go and confess to the resistance, but before they can go anywhere, the notary gets shot in the face. And his wife also gets murdered. Mintz is pretty angry with the shooter, so he makes the mistake of running after him into the crowd, where he's being recognized because he's a big SS officer. And the resistance guys that are there kind of grab him and take him away. And I thought he looked so, like, disheveled and disappointed and confused at being picked up by them.
Yeah, you're like, what did you think was going to happen, my guy?
No, he just thought he was gonna shoot the one guy that just shot at him. We don't know who it is yet. But unfortunately, they also spot Alice as she's watching him being taken away. And she just about manages to take Notary Smiles' little black book, blink, blink, blink for the name, full of names of Jewish people.
Yeah, so even though the notary's been killed, at least she has proof that he was the one, involved in this scheme and writing down names of all of his wealthy clients and basically passing them to the Nazis to be killed. And actually, Notary Small is based on a real-life unsolved murder of a 65-year-old lawyer named H. de Boer in The Hague. Shortly after the war ended in 1945, there's no direct evidence that he was involved in any nefarious plot like in the film, but during the war, he was pretty cozy with the German SD. So they think maybe that he was killed for that reason after the war, but we don't know for sure. Munz he ends up in front of the Canadian commander. The Canadians are kind of in charge of things now, briefly occupying the Netherlands in the wake of WWII Day. So Munz's superior officer pressures the Canadian commander to let the Germans carry out the death penalty that they'd previously issued on Munz. If you recall, they didn't like that he was negotiating with the resistance. And so the Canadian commander is like, I don't know if I have to let you do that. And the CO basically sort of blusters his way. And he's like, well, you can't stop me. There's an agreement and blah, blah, blah.
Doesn't he also say, you can call your commander, what's his name? He says you can call him and ask. And he's like, oh, right, I guess I don't really want to do that. So you go on and do your stupid thing, your German order thing.
He really just, this is out of my pay graded murder.
Yes.
So this is actually based on real events. On May 13th, 1945, there was a German deserter execution. And so basically the occupying Canadian forces, they had this huge task. They had to demobilize the Wehrmacht, the German army. And it was basically easier for them to allow the Germans to maintain the chain of command and the hierarchy and discipline their own guys and have authority over their own movements within kind of the parameters of demobilizing. And so in a POW camp in Amsterdam, some German officers performed an illegal court-martial and executed 2 German deserters with weapons that were supplied to them by the Canadians. And most historians agree this is super dubious and probably shouldn't have been allowed.
You think? Mintz actually gets shot. I remember the first time I watched this movie, I was quite surprised by this. I thought he was going to make it.
They firing squad his ass.
Yeah, and it's the Dutch, when they make movies, they don't tend to look away for nudity or for any kind of violence. You properly see him get shot. It's quite rough to watch, even if he's a German who did some questionable things. I've grown to like him a little bit.
Part of me was like, I don't think that him and Alice are ever going to be able to make this work after the war. I don't think they're going to be able to live somewhere where one or both of them is not getting in trouble for war crimes and related behavior. So when he got shot, I was like, well, I mean, how it goes.
Yeah. And it never ends, right? That's kind of the thing in this movie. Anyway, Alice is also arrested, as we've seen, and she is punished horribly as a collaborator. We've seen this in other movies too, and we saw it before in a scene that we've not described. But the head shaving has happened in the street at the Liberation. We've seen that in Band of Brothers as well. And it's very similar to how it was portrayed in this movie. But she's got to do some poop scooping, and it's really gross. And then she has to take her clothes off, and she gets a bucket of poop just dumped on her. It's disgusting. But then she gets saved by, guess who? Hans, who suddenly now has made his way onto the prince's staff. The prince is actually Prince Bernard, who had been put in charge a while earlier of the Home Army and the Resistance. And that made it much more efficient. But he's there. He's come to play the knight in shining armor to save her. So he saves her, takes her away, and her stuff gets returned to her, including the black book that she's brought. Hans, who's a doctor, if you can remember, takes her up to his practice where he's got all the money and the loot. And she's like, where's this from? He doesn't really tell her much. And then he tells her, she asks something about Munse, and he's like, oh, didn't you hear? I thought you knew. He's like, what? He's dead. And then the most famous line of the movie happens, and it's, how did I know it up? It's like, every Dutch person will know this. And it means, will it ever end? Or will it never end? And spoilers, and even today, it never fucking ends.
I will say that line cracked me up a little just because, especially early on in the movie, everything that happened, the Nazis would bust in, and then the Nazis would bust in again, and then would you believe it, the Nazis would bust in again. And so when she's like, will it never end? I'm like, I kind of also thought that earlier in the movie.
It's a bit on the nose, and I think it's well acted, but everybody's made fun of this actress for this line, like for years afterwards. But I thought, it's not bad. It's just a bit on the nose. But she's in shock and crying and shaking. So Dr. Hans gives her something to calm her down. And it's insulin, which surprisingly they've mentioned it before because he's taken it from some English dropping before, very early on in the movie. And obviously, when you're not a diabetic and you're given insulin is not good for you. Like, it can kill you, but not as fast as what is happening in the movie. But it's a movie, so who cares? So this is when Alice finally realized that he is the traitor. She gobbles up a bar of English chocolate and then flings herself off the balcony into the celebrating crowd below to get away from him.
Yeah, and this is where it's become clear that he's the one who killed Smalls. He's the one who killed Franken. He's basically, now that the war's over, he doesn't need these people anymore. He's tying off loose ends. He's getting rid of them so he can keep all the money for himself and not get in trouble.
True. Yeah, that's probably why he had her, to end her. I feel like at some point he was, maybe she's going to see it my way. And then he was like, oh no, she's not, so I'll just kill her instead.
I don't know, man. It kind of felt like he was just trying to lull her into a false sense of security because I don't think he would want to share all that loot.
He's kind of a bastard. That doesn't seem like too surprising. And it's funny because he's being hailed as a hero outside. You're like, Dr. Hans, and like chanting and cheering for him. And that's actually what kind of saves her because he gets lifted up into the arms of all these people who are trying to celebrate him, allowing her to get away. And you get to do the fun bullet point. Go ahead.
Well, she hooks up with some British and Canadians and she shows them this black book and they believe her. So they take her to Kuiper's. Basically, the Germans buried his son, Tim, and a whole bunch of other resistance fighters in a mass grave. So they're digging them up so they can get a proper burial. And Alice shows up and Kuiper's is pretty pissed at her at first because he thinks that she's the one who was working against them with the Nazis. But she's like, no, I have this black book. I can prove to you that it wasn't me. There was this whole plot. And the British officer that's there with her is played by Nolan Hemmings of Band of Brothers fame. Woo! I was very excited. And so she shows Kuiper's Notary Smalls' black book full of the names of all these wealthy Jews that were killed and robbed. And Hans's name is also all over it. He's clearly incriminated and involved. And a bit later, they realize that he's getting away in a hearse like Ellis once had. He's pretending to be dead or whatever. So they intercept it. She twists the screws in so that he can't get the lid of the coffin open. And then they just leave him in there to suffocate. And he's in the hearse, in the coffin, and you could hear him like struggling and trying to get out. And her and Kuiper's are just like sitting on the bank and they're just waiting for him to suffocate and die in this coffin. It's a thing.
I like this scene quite a bit. She uses her locket with her family photos on it. She tied the screws off there on the coffin. And it's little things like that that I like in this movie.
Yeah, she's like, fuck this guy in particular.
Yeah. And you can hear him choke, too. Like, it's pretty horrible. He's, like, begging her and screaming for her and trying to give her money and jewels. And she's like, fuck you, just die.
Yeah, it's funny. People who are very motivated by the external trappings of wealth always assume that other people also will be. And it's like, nah, man, you literally killed her family. What did you think was going to happen here?
So you think that's the end of it, but no, we have to do another flash forward to 1956, because that's where we started. And we can see Alice is gone back to her name, Rachel, and she's sitting on the bank, and her kids and her husband come and pick her up, and they take her in a Jeep, and they drive into their enclosed kibbutz with fences around it, and war going on, and people shooting people. And we never learn. It never fucking ends, is, I think, what the ending is supposed to tell us.
Yeah.
Maybe.
We see a little sign that says that the kibbutz was paid for with the money that had been stolen from the Jews that had been murdered. And if the movie had ended on that, you might have construed it in your mind as a happy ending. But because it pans out and it shows that this area is fenced in, there's barbed wire, there's guard towers, there's soldiers shooting at unseen assailants, you can see that really this money was just used to build like a cage of their own making. You know, they're locked in again. And like you said, it never ends. You know, they go from one war zone to another. They go from being the victims to the perpetrators. And the whole message of the movie about how there are no perfect victims, there are no perfect heroes. Everybody is shades of gray. This kind of gets hammered home.
Yeah, and that's where it ends. So that's the end of the movie. I want to just mark it for a second because we have some stuff for sure to talk about. And we have some notes. We thought that Paul Verhoeven, at least I thought for sure that he would be pro-Israel when I watched the movie. And then I did some digging and some thinking, but also mostly some digging, and it turns out it's not the way I thought it was. So Thankfully I looked it up.
Let's talk about that first then, maybe.
Yeah, because we were like, why? First of all, watching this today, I can't look at Israel the same way. With the war going on, with them being the aggressors, with them murdering everybody in Gaza. When I see Israel, I just feel kind of sick. But I also have to remember that the people portrayed in this movie, people who are actually not these people, but people like this actually existed, they are the victims. And I can't blame them for what Israel is doing today. But it did give me like a little bit of a, wait, we're in Israel. Why are we in Israel?
Yeah. I mean, I also feel at the same time, by the time we see them at the end of the movie, the tables have kind of turned, right? They've gone from, they have kind of become the perpetrators. So at the beginning of the movie, we have Ellis/Rachel in this beautiful, idyllic place where she's teaching kids and they're singing a song. It's a nice sunny day, there's tourists. And then at the end of the movie, when you see it again and it kind of pans out, you realize that she is in this kind of war zone situation. It's 1956, so the Suez War is happening. Israel has invaded Egypt. The Nakba has already happened in 1948, where 750,000 Palestinians were driven from their homes violently, massacred in many cases, in a massive act of ethnic cleansing that is still kind of part of the Palestinian national consciousness. And so, yeah, by the time this 1956 happens, that bookends the movie, these people have gone from being the victims of an ethnic cleansing to participating and perpetuating one.
I definitely did not see any of this when I watched it the first time in 2006. My perception of what's going on in Israel is definitely different today than it was then. I wasn't interested back then either, to be very honest with you. But today, I think it's kind of interesting to see a movie like this, even if it was made 20 years ago. And in 2006, I had no idea what the Nakba was. I probably only learned about it 5 years ago. I did my own research. I feel like so many people don't realize all the shit that's gone down in Israel and by Israel.
One of the quotes that you pulled from the director, Paul Verhoeven, who says, "The American view of the history of the struggle in the Middle East seems to be inspired time and again by the last bomb of a suicide bomber. Even Powell closes his eyes to the long history that preceded it." And that's what we're seeing now. People super hyper-focused on October 7th at the exclusion of the 80 years that came before it, right?
Right, yes. And also, the Nakba that you just mentioned was in 1948. That's 3 years after the war ended. It's so close. I can't wrap my head around how you can be the victim and then 3 years later decide, okay, well, I'm going to do the exact same thing to another people. It's so weird.
Yeah, that's kind of the message of the movie, right? There's nobody in this life who is completely blameless or exempt from doing bad things, no matter what happened to them in the past. And every character in this movie is like that. There are no characters where you can say, well, that's a good guy. That one is redeemable in some way.
And even Ronnie is just an opportunist. Like, she kind of goes where she can either be safe or profit or survive. And I feel like greed definitely is also a theme that's in this movie a lot, both from Israel at the very end, but also obviously in the movie as the whole plot around the money of the Jews is concerned. I'd never watched the movie through this lens before. It's really nice to watch it again and see all that in it, because people say this is kind of a superficial movie, but is it though?
Yeah, and it makes more sense now that we've seen these quotes from Paul Verhoeven where he says that he thinks that Israel has become a fascist state. You can obviously see what side he's on. And then if you kind of think of the movie within that framework, you're like, okay, I get the message that he was trying to get across, and it really feels more relevant than ever. A lot of the things that he's trying to say are perhaps even more topical than they were 20 years ago.
I feel like the only criticism I have with that is that it's kind of subtle. You do really have to think about it like we are to be able to see the message within it. I would have thought beforehand, before watching the movie, I thought he was pro-Israel for sure.
Yeah, I could definitely see how you would watch this movie just as kind of like a fun, thrillery, sexy movie, and you absorb all of the flash and the tits and the bullets and all that, but you don't necessarily pick up on the deeper message.
No, yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk super quickly about who Rachel Stein is based on.
The character of Rachel Stein, was based on a real-life resistance fighter. Her name was Esme von Aachen, and she also fell in love with a German officer, and she was long believed to have betrayed the resistance. Her memory only got reinstated within the Dutch Resistance Museum in Friesland last year. So they've discovered new evidence that she did not betray them.
This whole ending of the movie where she found the black book and she was able to clear her name, just wishful thinking.
Yep. It wasn't that easy for this lady. Esme, she initially worked as a courier for the resistance, but later hid Jewish people and Allied pilots as part of her resistance work. And she also transported weapons. In July of 1944, she had to go on the run from the SD, like Rachel, and could no longer rely on the resistance for help because they thought she was a traitor. He was captured and shot by the SDs on September 7, 1944. Most of the resistance people who were chased by the SD did not survive. So many of them were killed.
We should rate this movie.
Yes, it's going to be delightful. because we're rating it a number of dyed pubes out of 10. You want to go first?
Sure. I'm going to rate this movie 6.5 dyed pubes out of 10. It's pretty entertaining. You don't have to think too much about it unless you want to, like us, and just go down this rabbit hole of staring into space, thinking about current events. But yeah, it's cool. I always like learning more about the Dutch resistance and groups that were not necessarily combatants, but obviously their day-to-day lives are significantly impacted by the war. It's nice to have a female lead. It's nice to have female characters who are nuanced and aren't necessarily, not necessarily the virgin, not necessarily the whore. They actually have depth and motivations and goals, and they actually behave in ways that actual people might behave. So I did like that aspect. I thought the main actor was particularly good. Yeah, decent enough.
All right. I will rate this movie 7.2 dyed pubes out of 10. I don't know why I went 0.2 actually, but I do quite enjoy this movie. I feel like I have some kind of Dutch pride for this movie, and I don't really know why. But I think it's got more going for it than most people think, and the good stuff gets lost within all the sex sometimes. I feel like it would have been a better movie if there had been less sex in it, but I do like the action. It feels like it would be a good book. They made a book out of this movie after it came out, so it might be a fun read. I don't know. And I liked the acting. I didn't mind any of the music. It wasn't too remarkable. It made me laugh at some points. It was pretty funny, but also it made me think at the very end with you. So I enjoyed the little brain tickle there too. So not bad for a Dutch movie.
Yeah, always nice to when a movie makes you think about the way that things are. And we obviously had our myth making episodes last summer. And I mean, all media is political, but particularly war media. And so if the media is political, there's not really a reason why we can't be, right? And have these kinds of discussions. So I did enjoy that aspect.
Right. And I feel like you can be political as long as you do your research. If you do your research and it's based on actual things that are happening and have happened, then how can you be wrong in being political? I mean, I say that, meanwhile, that we have Trump who doesn't care about truth. So you can be very wrong and political, but I try not to be anyway.
Yeah. Are you reading anything?
Yes, I am. Thanks for asking. I am reading two things at once. I'm reading Agent Zoe by Claire Mully. I feel like I've said this like 6 times already over the course of the past year, but I'm reading it again. I'm trying again because we do want to cover this book on the podcast. And I'm also reading a Dutch book called Een land in verzet, which means a country in resistance. It's about resistance, not just the Dutch resistance as an organization, but just the whole of the Netherlands and how they resisted during the war. So I'm looking forward to finishing that. And I have something else that's funny to mention, because my parents have this collection of books by Lou de Jong, and Lou de Jong was a Dutch historian, and he wrote a 29-part history of the Second World War in the Netherlands. So I'm getting 29 books, and they're all like this big. They're all like big books.
Oh my God. Godspeed.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a fun read. I don't think it's meant to be a fun read. It's just an archive. He just puts down everything that happened during the war. So it's just going to be, if I ever need to know anything about Dutch people in the war, I can just take out one of those books and look for it. And like Wikipedia, but in a book.
Nice.
How about you? What are you reading?
I am finishing up Le Grand Cercle, which I think I already talked about, and then I'm going to start Agent Zoe next. So we'll be reading the same thing.
Read slowly, please.
I'll do my best.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for listening. You can catch us again next week, wherever you get your podcast, like on Spotify or Apple or wherever you want. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast, and you can visit our website, rosietheReviewer.com, for extra information. And if you really like us, we would like you to rate us 5 stars on all the places you can rate us. And also send an episode to your friends, because we need people to know about us eventually. So, thanks for listening.
Bye.